speaking, mute to yourself so that we are able to hear clearly those who are speaking. Thank you.
On.
Sounds as though everybody's lost their voice. So Dave Patterson in Ottawa, maybe I'll just start the conversation, and thank you for asking everybody to mute, because what I'm hearing is a lot of crashing and background noises and dogs barking and you name it. So it would be much appreciated if people would mute. Because of the email that came up, I expected some news from Nora today. That's the way I read the message, and so that's why I tuned in for some more good news. Just to let you know that I, as part of Orleans United, which is just on the east end of Ottawa, we did receive a grant, and our grant was for video equipment so that we could record and stream our service. And we have installed 3 cameras with video switcher and all the software and everything for streaming capability. We actually don't stream on every Sunday because we still have an issue around children being seen on camera. And our choir has agreed to be on camera, and all of our clergy. So we're still working through that, but we have streamed a number of funerals, and with people in Australia and England, relatives being able to be part of the service. And so we've done, I think, too many. I think it was up to 6, and we're probably going to be doing more. I've already got a request to do a wedding. So there's obviously a relative, I believe a grandmother in Vancouver that can't make it to Ottawa. So this is how we're spreading the word, and we're on YouTube. So if you just go to our website, orleansunitedchurch.com, there's a link there for all the sermons. So every Sunday for the last about 2.5 years is up there, and we share that good message. So this is how we have been able to put the $20,000 grant together with money that Orleans and other people have put into it. And so this is how we are attempting to spread God's word from Ottawa. Thank you very much, and I'll mute.
Thank you. I just want to give another shout out to Orleans United Church, is that when I first met with your leadership team, before even getting a grant, you shared with us some of the best practices of what you had learned in terms of privacy, especially with children, and getting people to sign off and all the best practices. Definitely when it came to video, because we had known, like, in terms of pictures, that's one thing, but what about the streaming? And so it was really great to receive your best practices, and we've shared that with other communities of faith since. So it's kind of neat to see that network growing.
That's great. It was actually Dave Clemens, part of our audiovisual team. We have 6 people that work on the audiovisual, the PowerPoint, and audio. So Dave Clemens is a creative writer, and he does a lot of video productions himself, and he's sort of led our streaming side. And we've changed our policy slightly, and we'll probably share more of that with you as a good practice. Thank you.
Where did you get the grant from?
That was embracing.
Yeah, that's really good.
That was embracing the spirit.
Yes,
so,
that's correct. And Orleans Church itself put in over $20,000 for additional audio equipment and things of that nature. So we have about our whole AV side is probably worth $50,000. And it's all run by volunteers, people with a computer background and a video production background. And 3 of us are lay worship leaders. So, and we also try to put most of our sermons together when we go out into other churches in PowerPoint to share that technology with them. So that's about what for now.
And it's Nora here. I'm just going to say, Dave, I'm sorry about the confusion, and in case anybody else was feeling that too, because I know it's unusual that you have me on to listen, not to talk. And I was kind of excited about that. And I'm just going to say one thing then that may help. I don't have any particular announcements, but one of the things that I feel like we are at this particular time in our church is, okay, so we've done the restructuring. We needed to do some restructuring. That's about structure and process. And I want to invite all of us in the church to be thinking more actively and working more actively to what are the things that then gives us the opportunity to do. Have we set aside God's call, our action in the world, our development of faith amongst young people or elders as we got busy with structure, and what are the things we're doing now to lift those things up and so on, or anything else anybody might want to say. But that's kind of where I am and where I'm hoping to hear from some voices about whatever you might want to offer. Thanks.
I can just mention one thing, that our first meeting here in Region 12, which is the Eastern Ontario Outaouais Region Council, we had our first meeting in Smith Falls, and it was a lot of learning, and we're going to have our next one-day meeting in October the 5th to try to work around some of the policy issues, try to bring the family together, because we're actually brought 4 presbyteries together into one region. And so we're still getting to learn and know each other. And so we're already making plans for our next large meeting. And we're throwing a date around about May the 4th. And everybody thinks that would be great. So the 4th be with you.
Chris said that he had something to say.
Hopefully it adds value. David, everybody laughed. You just couldn't hear because we were all on mute. I'm not your traditional participant in a discussion like this. I think I'm not a reverend or a minister. I run an outreach ministry that's pretty secular called Stone Soup Network for Windermere United Church. But just recently I finished working with the Edge Network on a workshop for people developing new or revising existing ministries, where we worked on theory of change, logic models, evaluation, a measured approach to ministry. And one of probably the biggest insights that I found that participants there were discovering is initially they came to it and the definition of their problem was, well, we have dwindling congregations and we can't afford our building. And that was probably the findings or the challenges that people came in to our workshops with. And probably what I constantly got is feedback from participants in the workshop is their biggest insight coming out of it that was, but that wasn't their problem. Their problem was relevancy to their community. And if without getting more specific than that, I would think that probably covered about 90% of the challenges or the problem statements initially before people got more specific. So in any discussion, I think of what is church called to be now, I think at its heart, it has to be relevancy to its community, right? And especially when we look at like the Anglican vote that just happened on LGBT rights and stuff like that, where you have a large portion of your community that's looking for a connection to the church, and I think that's a factor that church needs to consider. Really
important insights. Thank you for bringing the conversation. having heard this question before of relevancy, I think of it in a slightly different way. Congregations wrestle with the question of relevancy only because they are disconnected from their community. That the relevance of spiritual practice, of community in a society where loneliness has become the #1 killer, we're very, very relevant, but we're disconnected. So people don't know who we are, and often we don't know really what's going on in our communities in a way that we can bring the gifts of our tradition and of our faith and of our community into the community. So I think you put your finger on a really essential part, and getting out of our boxes, whatever they are, whether they're assumptions or whether they're buildings, and getting connected with the members of the community again, particularly in the Stone Soup network of those that are in need, and connecting them with the gifts there. I mean, it's a wonderful vision. And I wouldn't call it secular at all. I would call it inspired. Anyway, thank you for that.
Hi, John here.
After this comment, I just want to make some active room for women's voices in the conversation. So please proceed, and then I invite others to join as well.
Sorry, can I speak or not? Yeah, thank you. The challenge that we're talking about is building relationships outside of the church and inside, and with other organizations, other faith groups, and that requires listening, and it requires a lot of time. And I think one of our challenges is that we expect ministers to do that, and they don't have the time. So, and the structure being simplified doesn't provide as much resource as it used to. So we have to tap into the deep well of talent within our congregations. And I think that's really the challenge of how to take a church that may be struggling, and how do we bring resources to that church, not just with grants, but with making it part of our mission to help each other. And I think we tend to rely too much on ministers to be that point person, and these guys and girls are pretty busy folks. Thank you.
This is Alison here. Just picking up on some of the things that have been said previously, gathering together here for our regional meeting up at Port Elgin, I think we had sort of a great amount of inspiration, certainly through Cameron, her presence there with us. And I was inspired today by a friend who was at a recent healthcare event, because they are suffering so much, especially in cancer delivery care, burnout and compassion fatigue and overwork. And they had a very inspiring time together. And one of the processes that they used was the old game Chutes and Ladders. I would probably say Snakes and Ladders, to use sort of more of a Moses motif there. But to name the things that brought you down, and then to name the things that lifted you up. And I think for, ward clerks, CEOs, doctors, nurses, those that are providing all of the care were present together in one space and seeing more positive than they had negative, came in feeling a great deal of compassion fatigue and negativity, and left knowing that, they are the front line of healthcare in most communities. And I think the same when I came out of the regional meeting where I saw Cameron, is feeling that there were more ladders in front of me than snakes. But at the same time, I'm feeling a lack of inclusivity. Certainly, the vote of the Anglican Church, a friend said to me, it was a very hard thing to hear. And I said, but God is doing a new thing. And she said, inclusivity is new. And I said, but it's more than policy. It takes everyone. And it's not just inclusivity of gender or gender identity, but that of different ability, of color, of race, of language, of culture, and including mental health, which is affecting a lot of our clergy right now. So that's what I have to say.
It's Darla, and I'm in sunny, beautiful Quebec City. And I just wanted to say I'm pretty excited about some of the stuff that's been said. I'm not going to talk long because a lot of it was already said, but excited about the possibilities of technology allowing people to connect over large distances. With limited resources, a smartphone and a little cable mic, in my little congregation, Francophone congregation, our sermons are up and out, not every single week, but every other week, and had Bible studies and even a guided imagery meditation by Zoom, and had participants from hundreds and hundreds of kilometers away and even into South America, and also for pastoral care over Skype. I deal with a lot of Francophones, even in Africa, and a lot of people who are of the LGBT community who are facing persecution, and find us via the website, a Francophone inclusive church, and a minister who can offer pastoral care by Skype. It's pretty exciting stuff, and it really doesn't have to cost. We share space with another congregation. We rent, so installing $50,000 worth of equipment is not something that's possible for us. But for under $100, we have enough. I have good internet connection, and I'm in one of those places that allows that. A really good internet connection and really some minimal equipment, and we're reaching out over several continents, which is pretty exciting.
This is very rich and beautiful, what everyone's bringing. I encourage those who have something in their heart or head that may want to speak it to get that little extra push. Know that we're on your side.
I have a question, just listening to the reference of relevancy to your community, and then adding that to the sense that Darla presented about extending your reach well beyond your local community through technology. And that is, how does one then define one's congregation? And what does that mean anymore? Is it relevant? Do we have to be a group of people that have identified themselves as participants in this particular church, whatever?
My answer to that is, it isn't limited. Certainly our activities are not limited to people who are regular participants in our Sunday worship. But at the same time, let's take a different kind of an activity. If some other group was offering the same kind of Bible study in French, even online, I try to encourage folks that I would know to connect with those folks rather than being in a parochial kind of competition. This is my parish versus your parish. Mm-hmm. So those boundaries are pretty elastic where I live, in a very secular province. And where there are fewer and fewer church buildings for people to gather in, that's pretty elastic. My congregation, my community of faith, I would say, rather than congregation, isn't a specific congregation. It's whoever happens to show up to whatever gifts. I can't do all things. I wouldn't, do a musical night or something. I don't have that gift, but I happen to have a lot of fun discovering new things about technology that somebody might have. So it's about using your gifts, and whoever feels attracted to that or feels like that fills a need. For me, it's not about a specific congregation. We are called to serve the church, and for me, the church is wider than my local people who live within 30 kilometers of my church building where we meet.
I agree, Darla, and I would just encourage people that sometimes the questions are important around congregation. What does this mean for us? Because we have this structure. But I would encourage the experimentation and following the Spirit, as Darla has done, doing pastoral care with someone in a different continent, and let the action and reflection on the action reframe and help us answer the questions about what does congregation mean in a new time? Is it still relevant? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, maybe it takes a different form. But to claim the space of experimentation, which is why the comprehensive review developed this space of networking and clustering that was kind of outside of structure, to open up a space for experimentation and to give permission. The Spirit's doing something new, and if we attend to what that is, we can learn more about how to do church.
I'm not a member of the clergy, and so I take your point in terms of, especially, I'm assuming, Darla, you are, but maybe you're not. But I come from a congregation that has had a very strong ministry and is in the process of finding a new minister, but also has been a very active congregational body. And what I think the struggle now is we've left the model of the minister who was the kind of center point. And perhaps now that minister is no longer, they cannot do everything, they cannot be everything for everybody, they cannot be that center point anymore. But then what does that mean in terms of the congregational members who come or who aren't coming, for instance, to regular Sunday worship? So how do they come together to make a body that is the body of the church reaching out?
It's Nora. Just to say, I'm so excited by this conversation because Rob's mentioned the comprehensive review group, and one of the things they talked about many times, as Lauren will know, was that ministry and church community are going to look so many different ways in the future. And that's why I think they took that shift to the word community of faith, but without defining everything about what that might be, because we're still learning it just by the kinds of things that you're saying. And for me, some of my richest faith experiences were as part of a small group that others called a house church, but we didn't know what to call it, in a community where there was no United Church. And it's given me a confidence that church can look so many different ways and for different people and in different times of our lives. And so I'm excited by what I'm hearing here.
This is Ian Kellogg in Edmonton. I'm the minister at Millwoods United Church. What attracted me to this call was Nora Sanders' first invitation, which was a chance to talk about the drastic demographic change in the church. I've given up hope that this will happen, but it would still be very useful for me if the central leadership of the church, Nora Sanders as executive secretary, and the GCE and the moderator and our leadership regionally, would speak plainly and clearly to our demographic decline and our aging. I read the statistical yearbook every year. I have done since I first picked it up in 2009. And, it's 4, 5, 3% decline every year, and a relative decline for 60 years. So if we had I think it would help us in our communities of faith wherever we are, if we, through some miracle, would have a leadership that would say, our number of Sunday school students has declined by 94%. Our number of baptisms is down 93% since 1959. Our number of confirmations is down 95% since 1960. And that the number of people that show up on a Sunday morning to a spiritual gathering is down by about 90%. This during 60 years in which the Canadian population has more than doubled. We often talk about the fact that we're aging. The average age of an activist in the United Church is probably over 70 years of age now. In 1960, it was still elderly, but it was probably closer to 40. So we've lost 9 out of 10 of our members. No one suggests that we're going to see in the 2019 statistical yearbook next year that from 2017 to 2018 there wasn't another decline. I wouldn't be surprised if it's another 5% decline pretty much across the board. So, I mean, of course we've restructured, but just to say, it's not that we're shrinking or aging. It's not that we're half of our size that we once were. We're 90% down in absolute terms. In terms of people 15 to 29, it's about 98% decline in my lifetime. And that this has implications, not just for restructuring, but it has implications that are really deep and difficult. I mean, they're difficult because just saying those stats is difficult for our hearts. It involves a lot of grief. But I think if we were able to get beyond that grief, then we could think about a post-denominational existence, something quite more radical than what we've been about. Wonder if anybody has any thoughts.
I would like to jump in. Sometimes it's Stephan from Ottawa. Sometimes, I would say most of the times people know the stats, but they're reluctant to do something about it. I have many experiences of, we have declined, we have less people, you come with a project and you are received with a no. So sometimes it's the challenge to get the message across and to walk outside yes, it used to be that way, but it's not anymore. We're in the 21st century. Stop talking about the 1960s. And still, and as a minister, as a leader, I've went to events, gathering, you get out with all those ideas, you come back to your congregation and you hit a brick wall. There's a huge no, or all the excuse of the world that could not be done, should not be done, and you should, focus. People complain there's no youth, but if you're not, visiting 18 people, seniors per week, you're not doing your job. We were talking about, exhaustion for pastoral, from ministry, personal, and sometimes you have to maintain the old model and you're expect to create the full model, which both are full-time and you're not given the time. So is that also a huge challenge? You can go to Edge and to Edge meeting or, have this great idea to bring technology, blah, blah, blah. But if you have the 5 key person who hold the real power in your congregation that says no, that's often the end of it. So that would be nice also to have that kind of conversation of resistance to change, or some kind of glorification of nostalgia or something like that, or just complaining we're not relevant, but we're not doing anything about it. So that would be nice to have a comment and conversation about that.
So I just want to kind of say that I really resonate with the frustration I hear behind the comment around statistics. And when we work with congregations, we're actually quite clear about statistics at the congregational level, and when we work with structures at the denominational level or at the level of the presbytery. And in fact, we've got some good visual ways to represent that so that we can kind of break through the denial around where we are. Because I agree, we need to be honest about where we are before we will be ready to embrace change. And it is sometimes heartbreaking when you encounter a community, a congregation that you can see, and it seems obvious from some of the information, are in a real crisis, and yet they're not ready even to make minor changes into that, when really what's needed is an adaptive change. Nevertheless, we see at the same time the emergence of really exciting new forms of ministry. We see some ministries that are growing dramatically. We see people experimenting with new ways to connect with their community and to offer the gospel in different forms, embodied in different forms. And that is also happening. A statistic, when we before we started the Embracing the Spirit work, we were closing on net 50 communities of faith a year. And we've now initiated close to 400, over 350, close to 400 new ministries through this. They're not the same scale, they're not the same kind, not necessarily box, book, and preacher. We are in a time of transition. This is the point I'm making. And that it's not technical change we're looking for, it's paradigmatic change. And as leaders, it's really hard to face into that, to lean into that. There's a lot of fear. And there's a need to go deep in our own faith. There's a need to remember that this is God's project after all, and that if we're open to it, God will show us a way forward. And we need to support one another. We need to support the leaders that are on the front line, that are facing these, what in the one narrative could be very bleak, but to discover kind of the new thing that God is also doing, and to invite people to join in.
Betty would like to step in and comment on that and the earlier conversation. It's Betty Kelly. I'm a layperson in Prairie du Pine region in Brandon, Manitoba, and sitting in the corner with me is Marie Zabel from Killarney as a minister in that community. Wanted to take the conversation back, and Rob, you just already circled it back for me, wondering about that discussion and the tension between boundaries and our new, more fluid understanding of what's a pastoral charge or a community of faith. We don't have presbyteries. How can we reach out and do work in a wider way? And that tension between that new fluid understanding and our traditional understanding of boundaries and accountability. We used to have challenges around boundaries between presbyteries, and could someone serve in 2 presbyteries at the same time, or could a layperson be on committees in 2 different presbyteries? Now we're struggling with that along the regional boundaries. And I heard, I'm sure it was Rob that was speaking, mentioning fear and trust. And I suggest that that's something we need to continue to stretch ourselves and build that more fluid understanding of someone who is wanting to share their gifts, and there's a need for someone across a boundary from where they live, can still be a real gift to the church. And we as the body of the church should be able to trust each other to make sure that that's good work and accountable work. So there are a number of places where that tension between the vision and the working around the edges, which Edge is doing, and the understanding of we need to continue to evolve as a governance system at the same time. Systems theory at its best. That's all I wanted to say, but I needed to add that to the discussion. Thank you so much for hosting this.
Thank you for sharing that. Yep, sorry, go ahead, Sharon.
Yeah, I just wanted to give the opportunity for Tamsin Robson to speak.
Oh, there we are. Hi there. Hi, Joshua. Yeah, some really, really wonderful things are being said here. I hoped when I joined that it, I don't know, I'm very open about not going into ministry to preserve the status quo of the mainline church, I guess. What I'm interested in is, it's kind of twofold. And it has a lot to do with what's been previously raised about the relevancy of the church in the 21st century. Part of that, I think, is, it's one thing to pitch spirituality to unchurched people. Like, I'm interested in finding an inroad into queer and activist communities, especially because I feel like spirituality could help, or communities of faith can and should be allies of some kind. But also just like pitching the idea of church to my generation has proven really, really difficult, because I just got back from I just got back from a weekend retreat with Generous Space Ministries, which is a mostly queer-centered, mostly queer-centered space for exploring one's faith in an affirming context. And there are a lot of less churched and unchurched folks there of sort of all ages, like from 20-somethings all the way up. And, you know, yeah, these are people that have grown up in church, and they're very, very reluctant to return, even when I tell them, you know, my congregation is really good at being political. Like, my minister went around the country with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and like a good chunk of our sermons are like taken in the headlines. I'm increasingly feeling a conviction that the future of the church has to do with defining new spaces, not necessarily bringing new people into the pews, even though, like, I think bringing new people into the pews, you have to undertake radical change and be ready for radical change as we listen to their ideas. But also, yeah, I want to do stuff like, you know, house churches or spirituality gatherings at the local, you know, radical info shop downtown. I feel like Edge is kind of a natural ally in doing that, but I don't know. These are disordered thoughts, and as I get closer to starting an MDiv, I know that that's the kind of work that I really want to do, not so much palliative care for congregations that are kind of statistically tapering off. Any thoughts?
I'm going to just, can I just, were you still talking, Tamsin? Sorry.
Oh, please go ahead.
So I'm Lauren. Firstly, I'd love to chat with you. So a big part of how I see my role with Edge is connecting with new and emergent leaders and younger leaders who are interested and hopeful about creating new spaces, and so and defining ministry in new ways. So I think we should definitely chat. And I just wanted to say that, yeah, I'm someone who went into ministry feeling really not called to congregational ministry, actually, entirely not called to congregational ministry, but I knew I was called to ministry and leadership in the church. And so I started an MDiv having no idea what ministry would look like for me. And as I went through my MDiv, kind of found some communities that resonated, and I'm currently half-time with Edge because I'm also half-time in congregational ministry, but I often say that I was called to the particular community that I serve because it's a community that I feel like is creating new types of space and constantly redefining ministry. And so I just wanted to, I guess, kind of affirm you and what you're offering, and also kind of give a little anecdotal story around, you know, someone who kind of went in having no idea what would emerge, and feeling now, like we had a brunch church yesterday where there were 40 people gathered, and people shared stories of their week and where they'd seen God, and it was, I'm like, my team can attest, I can't shut up about how much I love my church, and how much every time I look out, it feels like the embodiment of faith community in church. So would love to chat.
Yeah.
This is Sandra Kerr again from Toronto, and I think I agree with you wholeheartedly in so many ways, and I don't think it's necessarily specifically defined communities. Statistically, if you wanted to look at statistics, as Ian was suggesting, we're looking at it in terms of not enough children in Sunday school, youth in youth groups. Of course, statistically, they aren't as great a number as there would have been earlier anyway, because the boomers are the statistical big generation that way numerically. But just going back to the idea of rethinking church, I think that's one of the issues that we're struggling with, and that is, as a layperson, people used to center their lives around the church and the church community, and the way to go to get church was to go to church regularly every Sunday. And I think to expect that for people to attend every Sunday is just not an expectation that would be viable today. As you can tell, nobody's going to the churches. We have an interesting program at our church on meditation. We have something like 250 people who are part of that meditation program, but very few of them actually attend the church. It's very active in the community as a community outreach, but they do not attend church on the Sunday. And that's why I come back to the question of, so then what is a congregation? What is a community of faith? These people are still coming, still finding some spiritual strength through the meditation, but they don't see themselves as members of a particular church. And so I'm wondering how the United Church is going to think of itself as a church, if it is, if we in fact really can redefine it. Are we still trying to expect we're going to define something that becomes a body, or are we just going to be finding programming opportunities and ways in which civilization can identify with something spiritual?
Lauren, this is Alison. I'm in Hamilton, Ontario. I'm closer to 70 than I am 30, but I do stand-up comedy to a lot of 20 and 30-year-olds who find me pretty relevant in their culture. I brought theater to Good Friday in Halton Presbytery a number of years ago. I'm also one of the reviewers for the Hamilton Fringe Festival, and we'll spend a lot of time with people in the downtown core who probably have never been in a church. So I wouldn't rule out the fact that it's only young that can find an alternative. I mean, I do not want to go back to the 60s. I was in Sunday school then and hated it. So, I mean, how does the church reach? What does the church do for those of us who want to do something alternative, but we are much older?
That's such an awesome question. Thank you. And yeah, I am very careful when I talk about the type of leaders that I'm most passionate about to say kind of emerging leaders. Many of the people that I do work with are younger, but I also, many aren't. And so I think that's so important. And just actually this morning was sending out some emails inviting people to a gathering of new ministry leaders, and had one person write back and say, oh, I do, like people who are new to ministry. And someone who said, you know, I'm middle-aged and feel like I'm called to different types of ministry and new and emergent ministry, and how do I connect and be part of this? So yeah, I think that.
So I'd just add, there's a particular vulnerability for younger emergent leaders in the church. And I would encourage you when you come across them, because I think your experience in the church might allow you to provide affirmation. Like sometimes a younger leader doesn't know whether they're crazy or not because their vision is so different than what they're experiencing. Yeah. Whereas we who have been through it, seen what is in the past, say, no, it's not that we're crazy, there's change happening. So really important for you to bring those two together and to create that place of affirmation and create a place of belonging and acceptance for the younger emerging leaders.
I want to give space.
What? Sorry.
Nora, you, yeah.
Yes, another Nora here. I have had the privilege, obviously I'm not that young anymore, I've long retired, but I'm still doing appointments. I've just had the privilege of almost a year with First United Church in Waterloo. And I tell them their standard saying is, we'll make it work. So we've got a lot of people who have a lot of different ideas, and people do take ownership for what they would like to see happening. I've found it a very interesting experience. However, my big concern is, and I don't think anyone else has voiced this, I am not sure that we as a United Church know who we are or why we are important in our world in this absolutely dangerous time. What is it we really believe in? Are we still talking about God up in heaven? Or are we talking about a more refined spirituality? What do we believe in? It's all very well to go around doing good for people. It makes us feel good, builds up our egos. But I do feel that we need leadership in terms of what do we really believe about God, and how do we believe that God's Spirit is at work in this very dangerous time. That's it.
I think Pat was trying to get her microphone connected to say something. So Pat, if you want to try that, you have the floor, and then we'll give Michelle Owens the floor.
I'm still here. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Well, I feel kind of embarrassed. I had a lot of trouble getting on, so I wasn't here at the beginning of the conversation. So I'm just trying to hear what everybody else has got to say. And I'm a lay person. And in a congregation that has challenges. I think that's all I got to say.
Well, welcome. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
And so Michelle.
Hello. I'm Michelle Owens. I'm the principal of the Center for Christian Studies. I'm a diaconal minister. And in hearing people talk about the call to non-traditional ministry, to something that is other than congregational ministry, it really brings up for me the challenges that have been historically found amongst the diaconate around the church creating space to have that ministry recognized when we are working in employment other than congregational ministry. And so I just want to lift up for a minute that the structural shift is creating more unknowns around that. And it is something that is becoming a pressing issue for my peers, myself, and for our students who are getting a lot of, I don't know, or I'm worried that we're going to move into some areas of really great regional disparity as we try and maintain the polity and practice of recognizing ministry that is non-congregational. So those manual sections that say in other employment, there seems to be not a lot of clarity on what that means or what the processes are that people can have other employment recognized as ministry.
Stephan?
Stephan? One thing I really like about the United Church hymn books I'm looking at over there, more voices. So we want more voices. If there are voices that are, I think someone mentioned, this may sound silly or I'm not sure, we're welcome. This is what makes us rich together, the diversity of thought, opinion, experience, theology. So if you've got anything on your heart, another reminder that we're all behind you and we're here to listen to you.
John here. Just what our board at our church is just going through a training process on adaptive leadership, and it answers a lot of the questions that are coming up. It's really changing the role of council from what I would say is largely advisory or often in the weeds of running the church, and into a more like a nonprofit board, providing guidance, creating a learning culture, and being adaptive. And not just throwing money at things that we know don't work anymore. It's an interesting process. It's still early days for us, and I will send you an email with some information on that. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
One of the things that I keep thinking about while I'm hearing this conversation, and my name's Colleen, by the way, and it was brought up with the statistics around the 15 to 29 piece and that sort of thing, but I think goes further than that, is how often we're going out and asking what people actually want. So when we're talking to about, let's say, the 15 to 29 demographic, and I have aged out of that by 1 year now, are we asking 15 to 29-year-olds what they want, or are we guessing at it? And I've heard some really fantastic stories about folks who wanted to do the video game thing and have, LAN parties and Dance Revolution and all of these things at their churches. And when they asked the youth, what do you want? They said, we need a quiet, meditative space where we can just experience silence, or experience a space that's low key and comforting, where we can think and read and all that sort of thing. And so I wonder how often we guess at what we're trying to do and put so much energy behind this thing that we think people want, and then get frustrated when we could have used a lot less energy or your energy differently to keep asking the question of our neighbors and of the people out there, what is it that you actually want us to be doing? And maybe we could do a lot less internal strategizing that way and do a lot more listening. And I think that would be very helpful for us all.
Thank you, Colleen.
You had something to respond to?
Susie?
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry. I was just newly ordained in the middle of June 5, and Michelle had mentioned non-congregational ministry, and it is something as a student at Sandra Soto Spiritual Center, which is a community-based.
Susie, you're a little choppy. Are you on speakerphone?
I am on speakerphone. As somebody who studied at a community-based program, because I'm not from one of the Indigenous communities of faith, I live in Brandon. As I began to study at Sandy Soto Spiritual Center, I kind of developed a community-based, an urban community-based relationship and community connection here in Brandon. And I had hoped, in the time that I was studying, that at the end of my studies, there might be something in place, a possibility in place for me to continue on with what I was doing. As thankful as I am to be able to have time at Steinbach Church in Manitoba here, and at Sandy Soto Spiritual Center,
I'm saddened that there wasn't an opportunity for me to continue or even to do my internship here. And in the years prior to becoming a student, I had a network of people that I was connected here in Brandon through many different places, including Brandon University. And I would have liked to continue that. So, and I had asked if I could do my internship, it was possible for me to do half of my internship here and then half where I went to Gladstone, Manitoba to do my internship. And that was just outside the box and couldn't happen. So I ended up doing my full time at Gladstone, which I was really thankful for. It's only an hour from here, and some of the things that I had started, I continued to do as I was at Gladstone. For me, as an Indigenous person, it really is about relationship and community more than it is about profession and ministry. And so just kind of thinking about all that and how all that works together has been challenging but interesting. And somebody had mentioned the status quo. I know for certain that I'm not interested in that. And so I just continue to do what I'm doing here to the best of my ability. And at Hope to Nurture, develop some leadership to take over some of the things that I was doing. Those events or those activities or those relationships and community opportunities that I was involved in are not necessarily connected to the church. But I really believe, my dad used to end our prayers and say, God is love. And that's kind of what I kept in mind when I was doing all that. And that and the other quote that I'm not sure if it's Francis of Assisi said, share the gospel at all times, words if necessary. And I think my sense is that's where people are at. I don't know if they want to hear any more about it, but I think they sure appreciate what the action and the love that comes out of the intended purpose of the church. And so in Indigenous communities of faith, I think there needs to be a connection, not only just connection, but conversation and consultation. I think if we're not connected with the communities of faith, whether they be Indigenous or non-Indigenous, they lose touch. They don't see the relevance. And so whether people are church or not church, I know that relationships are key. And ongoing relationships, not just at church. So that's just kind of some of my mixed up thoughts after a very busy few months and my return from summer school yesterday. So I'm thankful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie.
So it's Nora, I just want to say thank you for all the words today, all the challenges to one another, and also for the inspiration. I'm really grateful to have leadership, both lay and ministry, who are craving to do new things. And we're in a time, I think, where that's not all going to be defined from this place, but is going to be popping up where you are and in many other places. And I think as I hear several of these comments, one of the things that we grapple with as churches is what is it that we offer that people can't get somewhere else? And I believe we offer something really valuable that you can only get from church. And I think as United Church, we offer it in a way and to a broad spectrum of people that maybe they can't get anywhere else either. And I sort of hold that question in front of us and in front of myself in the work that I do. Did you say we're going to end with a prayer?
I would love to. I think that's a great way to close up. What do you think?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Shall we pray? Dear God, thank you for being in our midst today as we struggle to follow you and to learn what that means in each of our places and in our beloved United Church of Canada. Thank each of us that do this work, and may your love surround each person on this call and all those, everybody in Canada. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone.